Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today, and sorry for short delay. We were trying to sort through a little technical issue. Basically, we're going to be going through, I'm going to start off the presentation and talk a little bit about the cutting edge analyses that we help scientists set up in their labs, and that help with collaboration as well. And then we're going to have Salvador talk a little bit about some of the work that we helped set up with his work, with his research. And he works a lot in the simulation space, which is very fascinating work. And then we're going to kind of just circle back and talk a little bit more about what we can do to help you reach the next level with your research. So, and feel free to interrupt at any point with the chat window. You'll be able to type in different questions as you go, and we'll see them here. They'll ping me as well, just to make sure that I answer any of your questions that come up. Be thinking about ways that we could possibly work together to develop something that can help your research on the software side. And we work in the cloud in a lot of different ways. So I'll show you basically what we do at MetaCell is we work, our mission is to help research and development teams with aggregating data from many different sources, and that could be multimodal data, so from many different types of research studies, visualizing that data together and extracting novel insights. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the common problems with local data, with storing your data locally on your own system. There's limited compute resources, so your resources are just limited to whatever hardware you've purchased. And if you want to scale up, you've got to buy more advanced computers often, and it leads to issues, especially when you're dealing with big data. In terms of collaboration, it can be inefficient. It's difficult sometimes to send the large files, especially if you've got researchers at a distance. And in terms of even just being able to work together on the same data, it's kind of a slow back and forth process. In terms of dissemination of your research, just trying to get the data out there to the community, getting other scientists to get involved and use your data, that can be slowed down as well, especially if you're just waiting for others to find your paper, to find your data, or waiting for it to be reviewed, things like that. In terms of risk of loss or corruption, you're always facing that risk when you're managing your data on your own system, of course. And in terms of difficulty to aggregate the data with external data from other labs, that can come up as well. So we're going to show about how putting your data into a common system online can actually help in terms of standardizing the data and putting it all together into meta-analyses and things like that. Also, in terms of working with any software in your local system, of course, that requires installation and dealing with whichever operating system you're working with. A lot of the open source research software that's being developed works only in Linux, and you've got to troubleshoot the process of getting that installed. And often you've got to work with multiple different software packages in that way. And basically why local data has traditionally been chosen, that's because of cost. A lot of times in the past, working in the cloud, developing systems to work with your research data in the cloud has been costly. Also, people would like to keep that security kind of under their own hood. They want to make sure that they have total control of the security, and they believe that it's more secure to keep your data on your local system. In terms of convenience, obviously you already know how to use your local computer, so it's just a matter of saving the files onto your C drive, and you know where they are. So people have stayed with local for that reason. In terms of user experience, that's related. The reason I put that there is just related to using software for research. You often have the impression that any kind of research software that you're going to use is going to run a lot better on your local system than it would in the cloud. And also, oh yes, and we just received a question of if the webinar is going to be recorded. Yes, we're recording the webinar, which will make it a lot easier for you to share it afterwards or to review as you need to. Also, in terms of know-how, a lot of researchers don't have the know-how to set up cloud architecture to put their data into the cloud or to set up any kind of software in the cloud. So that holds people back as well. So in terms of addressing that first issue of cost, I just wanted to point out that cloud costs have diminished significantly in recent years. And there's also a lot available in terms of on-campus compute clusters that are being set up at universities to handle cloud. There's also cloud computing, and there's also in terms of discounts that you can receive from AWS or Google and many of the cloud providers for doing research. If you're a nonprofit or at a university, you'll get discounts and credits to set up. Even for startups, there's credits to get your business started. If you're a research company specifically, that will assist because they do favor research data. So that's something that also Salvador, who's on the call, has explored with their research. So I just wanted to point that out. In terms of security, when you're dealing with data in the cloud these days, there's ways to certainly make it HIPAA and GDPR compliant. There's also ways you can completely control where your data is being stored. So you might have regulations that state that the data can't leave a certain state that you're in or a certain geographic region. You can control where that data goes at all times. And you also have a lot more control in terms of audit logs and monitoring user access to the data. So you can really have a full record of any time that the data was accessed. And in the software side, you can have control of how the data is used. So there's additional security in that regard, and it's constantly updated with the newest security measures, of course, to prevent threats. So that's something that, as a researcher, you don't want to probably have to take the time to constantly be updating your system and being working on so many different fronts to deal with data security at the same time as doing your biological research. So there is an advantage in terms of having your data in some of the larger cloud providers that have huge divisions devoted to that. In terms of convenience, it might have been difficult in the past to upload some data into the cloud, but now the way that we set it up with a lot of the researchers we work with, we can set something up that's just like a Dropbox. So it can really just be like another folder on your desktop that you could have files saved to automatically, or they can go directly from any of your research devices or hardware that you're using in the lab, or any apps that you're setting up to get digital health measures from patients, or any sources of data that can be automatically uploaded into the cloud very efficiently. And you're then instantly able to review those in real time around the world with any of your collaborators. So that kind of aids in getting multiple teams kind of centered around the data almost instantly, which is kind of a huge advantage to working in the cloud. In terms of the user experience, that's something that I was very impressed with when I started at the beginning of this year with MetaCell. Basically, my background is as a neurobiologist. I worked for many years in the wet lab in academia. Did not have as much experience myself with developing software or anything like that. So I wasn't aware that cloud software was able to be as robust as a real software that you'd have on your local system. And I was really impressed to see that web browsers these days are actually able to hook up with your graphics hardware. So just as advanced as you could have for 3D graphics rendering as you would for example, as used often in 3D modeling of proteins or cells, you can do that from your browser just as well, and it can be constantly updated and improved. So the user experience have the same look and feel as any kind of local software on your system. And basically, in terms of the know-how, that's kind of where our company MetaCell steps in. We are a team of over 20 scientists and people who work in the data science as well as software engineering. So we're able to help you on the statistical side, on the side of understanding how your research would fit in with the newest software technology, but also just in terms of building enterprise-grade software, very robust software that can be used by lots of researchers remotely. Our teams are just dispersed in Europe, UK, and the United States. And we have been working for over 9 years with some of the leading companies in the pharma side, as well as in large research institutions and with academic institutions as well, developing some of the cutting edge software. And we're going to show you a few examples here in this presentation. And in terms of one of the things that's one of the main reasons why you would want to, where you probably are already starting to work with data in the cloud, is having to do with big data. So dealing with just the fact that the amount of data is kind of, as you know, is skyrocketing, and that's kind of led in many, to a large extent, by omics data and imaging data, which is really taking off. We're getting to the point where much more and a much higher quality imaging data is being generated from the clinic, as well as in the laboratories. We're utilizing imaging data to track cell development and track any kind of advanced culture techniques, measuring the cell's morphology over time and things like that. Also, the probes that we're using for EEG and electrophysiology, for instance, are a lot more sensitive, so that those generate a lot more data as well. And from the digital health arena, where we've got so many new wearable devices that are especially important now because of the pandemic, being able to remotely track patient health, that industry is exploding and has an estimated growth of 27% per year. So obviously you're not going to want to be trying to store all this data and manage all this data locally, especially when you're trying to collaborate across labs. So that's why where cloud computing really has its forte. And it lets you scale up. So you basically only pay for exactly what you use, which is a huge advantage in terms of, instead of having to just buy a lot of computer systems that then begin to depreciate, and it's difficult to know exactly how much you're going to utilize year to year. So now I'll go into a bit of some of the software designs I've been talking about. And the first one is really cool. It's called a virtual fly brain, and we helped develop this. It's basically a system that helps researchers who are studying the model organism Drosophila to be able to put together their data from many, many different labs into a 3D anatomical space. So usually, traditionally data has been just uploaded to repositories and referenced in PubMed papers, but this lets you actually look into very specific anatomical regions and see all of the studies that have been done in that area, exactly what data has been generated. In this particular case, it's for neuronal morphology and gene expression. And you can start actually typing in queries into the software. It's available online, and it's used by thousands of researchers per month around the world. But this is kind of an example to get you to start thinking about the concept of a new way to kind of arrange your data, a new way to organize how information is kind of being put together. And right now, since so much data is being gathered, it's necessary to start thinking about the organization more, so that we can start envisioning ways to find new connections between the data. And here we go. So this kind of talks a bit about it more. No longer do you have to ship hard drives around the country to send your data, and this does increase the dissemination of your data. Right when if you were in this particular case, for example, studying Drosophila, right when your data gets uploaded into the system, it's now accessible by all the other researchers that are wanting to see how it relates to their data. And it makes it a lot easier for meta-analysis and standardization as you see how other data is being put in there, but also leads to simulation as well. And I'll show you a bit about that in a moment. But it's important to think about not only organizing the data anatomically, as I just showed, but also thinking about just the complex relationships between many different data across many different biological scales. So, for example, imagine that you're collecting data just about a signal transduction pathway, or you're trying to understand, for instance, just the density of certain receptors in a certain portion of a neuron, or the density of certain cells in the region of the body. All these different scales are important to start organizing in a way that kind of keeps track of all the relationships between each of the data. And that's going to be really useful for the next stage of when we actually have people who are trying to put that data together into models of how those systems work in the body. If you're trying to search in PubMed, traditionally, you just type in the name of like an author or a year or certain keywords that might appear in an abstract of a paper, but you won't be able to know exactly where that data, if that data is kind of coming from a specific part of the body and it's only mentioned maybe in brief in a paper, it's not going to come up in your PubMed search. There's a vast amount of information that's lost that way. So that's just another kind of way to think about why organizing the data in terms of in categorizing it in terms of ontologies and understanding where it's located in the body that it's taken from is necessary. So that kind of, the reason that leads into simulation is because imagine that you might not even be doing any work in computer simulation, computational biology at all, but the data that you're generating could be very useful for computational biologists. And this area is something that I personally did not know as much about. I would sometimes read papers where they had developed an advanced, fancy-looking model to try to understand a disease mechanism or a mechanism of how certain kind of drug functions in a system. But it was kind of like a black box for me. I was like, okay, that's cool that they developed it, but it's actually now getting to the point where these models are actually being able to demonstrate real world data and be able to kind of recapitulate what we find in real world data. So big pharma is starting to pay attention, and they're hiring more people in quantitative systems pharmacology to be able to model how these systems that they're interested in are working, to be able to select the appropriate dosage for clinical trials from the get-go, just to have an idea of the range of doses that even make sense just by understanding drug-drug interactions and things like that. And that's the long-term goal, but it is actually something that's starting to, an initiative that's starting to grow. And the way that happens is, first you have to start with the data that's being generated in the real world. So by organizing it in the way that we're talking about it, getting more and more scientists around these concepts, it allows that data to be starting to be imported into models much easier. So let's see. And another thing that's kind of interesting from this is by taking into account all those complex relationships. So for example, understanding that increasing the concentration of one protein in a region is going to cause this gene to be expressed further, and that gene will then lead to the increase in another protein. Understanding these relationships across studies, putting them together into a model actually allows you to do a much more advanced bootstrapping analysis of data. So you could usually if you're going to do some bootstrapping statistical analysis of data, you'll say, okay, what if a few of these parameters were modified by 50%, plus or minus 50% or something like that. Instead of that, it will actually say, it knows that if this is increased a certain amount, it has an exponential effect on this, and then it has another effect on this. So it actually understands those relationships, and you can start to really play out whether or not the results are reliable from a clinical trial, for example, or what the different scenarios you could get in a study would be. So you can do a lot of virtual experiments that way. Basically is going to lead into simulating cells and systems. So I'm going to pass the baton over here to Salvador to talk a little bit about some of the software he developed in the simulation space. 1 second. Here we go.
So yeah, I'm going to talk about this tool called NetPine, which is a tool we have developed over the last 4 or 5 years to make simulations of brain circuits easier. So the tool allows you to first build the models in an easier way, combining a lot of experimental data from different labs and different scales of the brain. then to run the simulations to simulate the activity of these circuits, and do a certain number of analyses that are common in neuroscience, plotting different figures, the different activity of the neurons, the connectivity of the network, and so on. So the tool is designed to make this easier for people who are not so familiar with programming, like clinicians, for example, or experimentalists in neuroscience. And the idea is that, next slide, please.
Sure.
The idea is that one of the big things to make it easier is this. Okay, here. Yeah. One of the things to make this easier is to develop a graphical interface, and this is where we got in contact with MetaCell to help with this process. And over the last couple of years, they have done a fantastic job of moving this to the cloud first to allow people to connect to the tool in an easy way, and also to develop this fantastic graphical interface to make all the things that were possible programmatically, like running code before, now all through the graphical interface. So people can now build the models, run the simulations, and plot all the different analyses directly on this graphical interface, which is hosted on the cloud. So you can just go to our website and build your models and simulate them. Next. The big thing, of course, for us, the cloud has been a big advantage in terms of running simulations. So to build these models, to run these models, they are very complex, and I will show an example later, but they require solving lots of differential equations for each of the single neurons. And when we combine them and have 10,000 neurons, this requires lots of resources. So the cloud provides us this large computational capacity that we need. And for example, using Google Cloud, we have recently been able to reach this milestone of running on 100,000 simultaneous cores. So we're running these simulations of the brain on 100,000 cores. And this, of course, allows us to move our research very fast, accelerate our productivity, and get results for all the different parameters that we're testing in the model very quickly. Next slide. One of the things we're also doing, which is quite related to analysis and machine learning in general, is using these genetic or evolutionary algorithms to try to optimize or fit the models to experimental data. So in modeling, something that you want to do is validate your models, make sure the models you're building actually reproduce the activity of the brain, so that you can then use them to explore hypotheses or develop new treatments for disease. And so this first step involves tweaking the parameters to make sure your model actually matches biology. And to do this in an automated way, we have used these genetic algorithms, which were usually used in single cells, but we have extrapolated to using it in large-scale networks, biological networks. And again, you need the computational capacity of the cloud to be able to run these very massive algorithms. And we have shown that they work very well. So here you see at the beginning, the network wasn't really producing meaningful activity, and after this genetic algorithm, we got matched to the experimental data that we were seeing. Next. The cloud also allows us to perform lots of analysis on this, for example, genetic algorithm, explore the different parameters and how they are affecting the simulation output. So all this analysis can be done as well on the cloud. And it's much easier to work with the files which are already there, uploaded in the cloud. We can just run the analysis there and visualize the output on the cloud. Next slide.
Oh, sorry.
This is just showing some example of the things that the tool can generate. So these are measures that are commonly used in neuroscience, like the local field potential, the electrical activity in the brain. And the tool can be used to generate this activity so that we can compare them to experimental data. Next slide. And this is another example, a very common measure used, which is the current source density. For those who know a bit about neuroscience, this is one of the things that are measured when you're recording the brain of animals. So it's very useful that the tool can match this activity to the experimental data. Next slide. The other interesting thing about having this tool based on the cloud is that we can integrate it with other tools and portals. So, for example, we're working together with this tool called the Open Source Brain, which is basically a platform where you can host your different simulations and models of the brain, and you have a number of tools that can interact with each other. And so we are hosting our tool NetPine on this platform. And this allows us to interact with another tool, for example, that they have there called, next slide, this NWB Explorer, which is a tool to essentially visualize experimental data. So that means that we can run simulations of the brain with our tool and then export the data to this other tool, both of them hosted on the cloud, and visualize our simulation data, compare it to experimental data from the database that's available in this NWB Explorer, and make sure that our simulations match the real experimental data. Next slide. So I just wanted to mention that the tool is growing pretty quickly, and one of the reasons is, I think, is this graphical interface. So we have over 80 models that are being developed already in 40 labs around the world. You have a full list of the models here in this link, netpine.org/models. And it's interesting because we have models of many different parts of the brain, different parts of cortex, of the thalamus, cerebellum. We have models of different species, from humans to monkeys to rats to even bats. And we even have models of the neural circuits in the heart, which are also have neurons. So it shows the flexibility of this tool and how it is being used by many modelers for different purposes. Also, of course, to model different disease like ischemia, strokes in the brain, or epilepsy, as well as treatments like this a direct electrical stimulation, which can be used to treat some diseases. Next slide. And just briefly, I wanted to mention one of the example models that we have been building for a couple of years. And this is a very detailed model of the motor cortex. This is the part of the brain that controls movement. So we simulated in a lot of detail a sort of column of tissue in the brain of the mouse. And we included all the neurons that would be present in this very small piece of tissue, which is approximately 10,000 neurons, as well as all the synaptic connections. The connections between these neurons in this piece of tissue would be approximately 30 million synaptic connections. So the model simulates all this activity. Next slide. And we included, as I was mentioning before, a lot of experimental data from over 40 papers. So this includes information about how the neurons are distributed in this part of the cortex, in different layers, the different cell types that are involved. We have different excitatory cell types, different inhibitory cell types. We have also the density of the neurons in each of the layers. So it's a very detailed, very accurate model of how this part of the brain works. Next slide. And for each of these cell types, as I was mentioning before, we model it in a lot of detail. So here on the left, you see the actual image from a microscope of the neuron, and on the right, how we simulate it on the computer, and as well as the activity of that neuron to different injections of current and how it responds. So we are capturing very accurately the electrical response of the neuron as well. And for this, we, of course, also required supercomputers on the cloud to run these very massive optimization algorithms to make sure that the single cell models are also reproducing the biology. Next slide. We incorporated, as I was mentioning, connectivity data of how the neurons are connected from different parts of the brain and the long-range scale. Also in the local circuit, a lot of experimental data from different labs, and even the distribution of the synapses in one of the single cells. They have very specific patterns, so we also included that. This is just to show the level of detail that we're covering here. Next slide. And with this model, for the first time, we were able to reproduce the activity of the motor cortex in mouse. And so we showed with a statistical comparison of each of the cell types and how they match the actual experimental data recorded from neurons in the mouse brain. Here you see in the left the activity of all these neurons. Each dot represents one of these spikes or action potentials of the neurons. And we also match this other measure at the bottom right, which shows the local field potential. So this measure of oscillations in the brain, which is an important feature of the brain to encode information, and was also matched by the simulation. Next slide.
Yep. So I was just step in at this point as well and just talk about like how MetaCell kind of is able to assist with projects like this or any kind of project that you're envisioning. And I will open it up afterwards to answer any questions about your specific research if you have any. But basically, we're able to help if you already have, let's say, some open source software that you've started to develop in your lab, or maybe you already have some users downloading it and putting it on their local systems, but you're interested in hosting it in the cloud to make it a lot more accessible and to make it kind of have a lot more longevity in terms of just being maintained. We can help with that. But also, if you're just starting to envision how software might be able to kind of play in, custom software might be able to play into the research that you're doing to kind of help you do analyses that you're not currently doing, or help you collaborate in a better way with other researchers. We're able to help you in a consulting way to actually plan out what that software could be, help you make prototypes of it, and even apply for grants, which I'll talk a bit about that next. In terms of building any kind of apps that could go on any type of devices, or building the cloud software, even just building local software to integrate with cloud data that's out there, we're able to assist with that. So we have PhDs in AI-based analyses. We have a lot of experience with machine learning and deep learning, and able to help on the bioinformatics side, statistics as well. So we can help set up the most advanced algorithms based on cutting edge algorithms that are just published recently in papers. We're able to kind of bring those into the fold and help you set those up in the system. We can also set it up so that you can continuously modify those algorithms over time and add new ones as you wish. We can help in terms of setting up interactive graphs that you can look at many different types of data in the way that's most fitting for your research, and setting it up so you can look at that data with your collaborators, having the same view so you can actually share information and explore that data together. And in terms of simulation, we can set up some of the simulations like you've just seen, and we're very interested in that space of exploring a lot further what can be done, because we see how much potential this area has, and we'd love to help all different types of biomedical researchers get their data into the right format and the right framework to assist computational biologists in setting up these simulations. And in terms of having a partnership with us, that can take a lot of different forms, but we can work to apply for grants together with you. We do so right now in the UK and Europe and the US, but we're interested in exploring opportunities in other countries as well. And in terms of how we would work, we can work as a co-PI if permitted, but also we can work as a subcontractor. We can assist with discovering the right funding opportunities, drafting the proposal, setting up the budget and the roadmap for the software that we develop, exactly like what would be developed when and what the future plans with the software could be. And we're able to help you connect with some of the initiatives that already are existing to further research in data science and software development to assist in all areas of biological research at some of the major institutions. So I would like to kind of open the floor for questions at this time. If anyone has anything, feel free to type it into the question box, and we could answer any, or if not, I mean, anyone can basically just kind of even just brainstorm about any of the kind of research that they're doing, anything that that might involve putting data into the cloud, or even just any kind of software that they could envision building that could kind of assist with their research. Or if not, of course, you can always email us. We have our information here, and you also have information from the invite, I'm sure. We can be in touch, and feel free to send us any kind of questions. We're happy to help. As I mentioned, many of us have long careers before working in industry as biologists ourselves, and we still are writing research papers involved in academic research, so we're very happy to assist in planning these things out. Oh, I see something here. Let's see. One second. So, okay, developing phases of. So I have some data about developing phases of mouse retina. Would you be interested in working with me to get funding? Absolutely. So thank you for sharing your email. I'll definitely be reaching out. I actually, a lot of the research that I was doing before joining MetaCell was actually working in a lab that was shared with a retina lab. So, all of our conversations were about the retina. so definitely interested in exploring that. Where will the slides be available? We're going to actually email you a link to be able to see a replay of the video, and I can also make the slides available as well. That's from Thomas. If anyone else has any other questions or anything you want to shout out, we're here, and I'm always available, so feel free to reach out as well, either via the email here or the email that you guys received. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch today, and we really appreciate your support. So I hope you have a great rest of your day and a happy holidays. Thank you.